Welcome back to another episode of Expats in Ukraine. I'm Corey, your host, and today my guest, she is from the US, the 157,000 followers on Twitter. She's very notable, wanted by Russia, Sarah Ashton Cirillo. She's an author, journalist, soldier. There's so many that she does, so many things that she does. And first of all, I want to do like an icebreaker, Sarah.
Sure, of course.
So it's like something more fun. It'll get me to know you better, and it'll give our audience a chance to get to know who the real Sarah Ashton Cirillo is, because there's a lot of rumors online, right?
Yes, Corey, absolutely. And give it your best shot. If you can uncover the whole mystery of Sarah Ashton Cirillo, then
I'll try my best in the hour and 20 minutes that I have. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is a this or that kind of like game. So pancakes or daruni?
Pancakes.
Pancakes. Okay. Lake Tahoe or the Black Sea?
Black Sea.
Black Sea.
Black
Okay.
Sea, yes.
Whiskey or vodka?
I don't drink until after victory, so ask me that question once the Russians are out of here.
Hopefully by the end of this year, okay? Because I know you were saying 2024 is the year, right?
We'll say that it's going to come at the right time.
At the right time. Okay,
Yes.
let's say that. Las Vegas or Kyiv?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
Las
Okay.
Vegas is the most magical city in the world, and while my home is Kyiv right now, home means Nevada to everybody in Las Vegas.
Yeah. I saw that you're from northern Florida originally.
That's what they say.
Yeah, so they say,
ultimately,
okay.
I was born in New York, but only lived there for 3 months. So I grew up in the deep South. I grew up in North Florida. That's why it's out there that I'm from northern Florida.
Yeah.
Went to school in North Florida, worked in North Florida, lived throughout the South, including Mississippi. And in my adult years, I moved to Las Vegas. So I consider Nevada as my home state now.
So you don't consider yourself a Southern girl?
Well, the South,
Southern Bill.
it never leaves you. And I'm very proud to be from the South. I think folks from the South get a terrible reputation as being maybe pigeonholed into these ideas of racism or these ideas of sort of intolerance or small-mindedness.
Yeah.
And yet I will never be grateful or never not be grateful. I will never not be grateful for coming from North Florida, because it allowed me to understand the world in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I was born in a big city.
Yeah, totally. I've been to Vegas many times, by the way. I love Vegas as well. I used to go there once every couple of months. I didn't have a gambling problem. Maybe I had a drinking problem. I don't know. But I would say Kyiv. I like Kyiv a lot better than Vegas. I don't know.
Again, Vegas is such a magical place that people have a hard time understanding that it's also a city.
Yeah.
And that's why I always throw Vegas out there no matter what. But ultimately, my roots are from the southern part of the United States. And shout out to everybody in Mississippi. Shout out to everybody in Florida.
Yeah, and I will go for the $1 million question right now. Why the heck are you here?
You know, I'm not supposed to be here, especially 27 months after I arrived, Corey.
Yeah.
As you may have read, and some people are aware of this, I originally came for just a couple of weeks. My return was literally 3 weeks from flying out of the US to when I was supposed to be back in Nevada.
Yeah.
And in 2015, I covered the Syrian refugee crisis, what we call the Syrian refugee crisis, but it was folks from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, North Africa, who were migrating from Syria, Turkey, and the Near and Far East, Global South, to Europe. And so I went ahead with these caravans and covered it as artistic and sort of a narrative storytelling of what they were going through.
You ended up writing a book about this,
I did write a book about it. The book was awful. I'm very proud of the photos that were part of it. And from a photojournalistic standpoint, it's something that I'm proud of. From where I was coming from as a writer, there was something missing. And it was due to the fact that I was dealing with a lot of issues over transition at the time. So I felt almost as though I was hiding from myself while I was doing this. And 6-7 years later, that was 2015, 2016. All of a sudden, 2022 comes around. And I'm writing about politics in Nevada. I'm focused on a lot of different analysis. I'm an analyst by trade. And ultimately, I said, hey, we don't have a lot happening in Nevada at the moment. Political season, the primaries were still to come.
Yeah.
Let me fly over there and just do a compare and contrast to the refugee situation. I didn't even know if I was going to leave Przemysl. And for those who aren't familiar, Przemysl is the border town with Ukraine where so many refugees went through. So I wasn't even sure if I was going to leave Przemysl, let alone there was no plans to stay in Ukraine.
Yeah. And yeah, I want to kind of go back when you're like in the U.S. before you come to
Sure.
Ukraine, because there was so much going on there,
There
that led to
was,
you
there was,
doing so much over here.
There was.
And I want to talk about this opposition research that you were doing.
Sure.
Okay, did you ever think you doing some opposition research, it would kind of, it would lead to you thwarting or uncovering some conspiracy, you know, about the riots after 2020, Paul Gosar involved? Did you ever think that it would just be like,
I never could have imagined that. So I was running a couple of political campaigns.
yeah,
And it was for a position that's very powerful in Nevada. It was for judgeships. And judgeships are something that are being talked about right now. And a very, very close personal friend of mine was one of the candidates. And she was a Democrat, but her values were more libertarian leaning or even Republican leaning. And I viewed it through the lens of, if I'm going to be sitting in a courtroom, who would I want judging me as a transgender person, as a person in the LGBT community?
Yeah.
And I wanted my friend, and I would have preferred the other person who I was also managing her campaign, even though they were Republicans.
yeah,
So my goal was to get her and them elected. Ultimately, it brought me into this sphere where this trans person was being accepted by Proud Boys. This trans person was being accepted by...
But you said you were tokenized, right?
I use the term tokenized because I, to them, was a good trans person.
Yeah.
And that's what I meant by tokenized. They accepted me because I didn't get too far out of line for what they would imagine somebody should be doing.
And
as
they point to you, see, we're accepting of all people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think one of the now very hardcore Republicans in the state of Nevada referenced me as a unicorn. I think that was the term. And what happened, because most of my friends in Nevada are still Republicans, still members of the GOP. I myself am very centrist Democrat. One of them came up to me and said, we have a terrible anti-Semitism problem among some aspects of this Nevada Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I said, well, no shit, excuse my language, but no shit, I've seen it. And they said, were you really planning to do a book on your sort of, time? I said, absolutely. Of course, we got elected, we got the judges elected. So the judges are in office. What am I going to do now? And as we were going through the notes, what took place is that I had been called to help get the Proud Boys out to deal with the so-called, election violations that had taken place in Nevada, allegedly. And all of a sudden, there were a lot of different people who were interested in those communications. Yeah. And in those same communications, there was a lot of anti-Semitic comments.
I think the texts are published, right?
Some of them are published.
Texts,
Yeah, I think they're out there.
Yeah.
And I turned it over. What was interesting is when I turned it over to members of the GOP, and it was supposed to be kept for internal use only so they could understand what was happening. And they themselves leaked it. I didn't leak it to the media.
But why would they do that?
Because there was an internal battle in the Nevada GOP. So they thought they would one-up it. And what that forced me to deal with was, do I own what happened in the sense of acknowledging that all this took place, or do I hold it for a book? And one of the biggest criticisms that authors go through in the media is that they hold the important information. Yeah, for the book. For the book. So I said, I'm not going to do that. So we went ahead and I got in touch with some of the media that were calling me, asking where these originated from. And I was very open about it. And it got very dirty and nasty. But in the end, I think 7 or 8 members of the GOP were expelled from party leadership. Yeah. And the folks who really had asked me to come forward with this information, they're still in positions of respect, and some are elected officials. And because of that, I'm happy that it played out the way it did. Although at the time it was a maelstrom. It was terrible.
But how does Paul Gosar fit into all of this? Because there's like some rumors that he was involved, but he denies it.
So Paul Gosar was a client of somebody who we hired to consult on 1 or 2 of the judicial campaigns.
And just for the people at home, Paul Gosar, he's a House representative
from
Republican
Arizona.
Party, Arizona. Yeah.
And Andy Biggs was there as well. Andy Biggs was there. And there's a photo of me in all of, post-transition with these guys. I was so accepted that here I am taking pictures with Gosar and Biggs.
And you know, like long hair?
Yeah, it was very cute. Yeah, of course. And when that happened, it was clear that the one campaign sort of strategist in Nevada was in communications with the Gosar campaign. Gosar denied it. The campaign strategist sort of gave a non-committal response, but the text messages didn't lie.
Yeah, of course,
they were
of
there.
course. And how did all of this affect your political views?
At that time, I was much more progressive.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's affected my political views more than anything is this war for liberty and liberation. I've become much more conservative in my outlook, to use the term conservative. I like to use the term pragmatic.
Yeah.
I've become much more pragmatic in my understanding of the world since I arrived in Ukraine in the last 27 months. And a big part of that is because I've spoken to folks on both sides of Capitol Hill. I made 4 trips to the States. The people who are most engaged in seeing a victory for Ukraine are, and the loudest about it, for the most part, are Republicans.
Yeah, I would classify these like as kind of like these old school Republicans. I mean, nowadays they would classify them as rhinos.
Yes.
Yeah. But what do you think about this kind of this MAGA community that kind of not co-opted, but they're basically taking over the party at this point?
I know some people who are close personal friends with Donald Trump. I will say this about former President Trump. I believe that he could potentially be very good for Ukraine because he's a man who understands that in the end, maybe development and restructuring and rebuilding is very important. And if former President Trump had the opportunity to come over to Ukraine and understand what this fight was for and saw the opportunity to really put his mark on the future of Ukraine after our victory over Putin, I think that's quite a plausible scenario. As for some of his adherents, I think that they just want to get talking points out there. They just want to be heard. And one of the issues that we deal with when it comes to our war against these tyrants and these autocrats, it's a war that enables, it's been Putin leading, but has Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea. There's some connection now very clear connection now to the People's Republic of China and elsewhere. Why do they get away with saying what they do, even though it's enemies of the United States that are carrying out this war? Because unfortunately, even when Ukraine was at its highest point in the headlines, it barely broke as a top 7 or 8 issue among the American voters.
Yeah.
And so these folks who use the term MAGA, these folks who are out to get to the bottom of what's really going on in this sort of global structure, they can throw anything out there, Corey, because unfortunately the American people are focused on issues such as gas prices, such as inflation, such as the southern border, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons I went down to Latin America and spent a month down there.
Oh, I saw this. Yeah, you were covering immigration.
I wanted to, no, it was immigration came up.
Okay.
Russian influence in the Americas.
Okay.
And it showed a clear intersectionality of some of the issues that folks on the right are concerned about. We clearly tied Russia's weaponization of migration to the southern border. 4,000 Russians attempted to cross the southern border in 2021. It's up to almost 50,000 in fiscal year 23 and still going up. We saw terrorism being carried out in the Americas. We know from the UN itself, it hasn't been widely covered, that Russia was, and through Wagner, recruiting in Mexico, recruiting in Peru, recruiting in Colombia. We know their ties to Venezuela. And so my report was presented to members of Congress, to some congressional committees, and I think that played an integral role in opening the eyes of some on the right to the existential threat Russia poses, not just to us here in Ukraine, but to the United States as a whole.
But how do you get a lead that something like this is going on? Like, where do you, you have your ear on the grounds. Like, where do you get this lead that, this might be happening? Let's go check Mexico. Let's go South America.
It was interesting how it unfolded. I was on the official delegation trip in December. There was multiple delegation trips from Ukraine to the House of Representatives, to the Senate, to the US Congress. And my commander and I were in a lot of meetings regarding free speech, free press, pillars of democracy, et cetera. And over, we heard that there was something going on the southern border. There was something taking place in the Americas. And I spoke to my commander and I said, hey, if we're hearing it from this many elected officials on both the left and the right, I want to take leave and head down there.
Yeah.
And at first they were not happy with that idea, but ultimately, right before New Year's 2024, I flew down there. And really, I started in the Darien Gap. I started in the Darien jungle between South America and North America, and then just went up from there all the way to the U.S. southern border, back down to the border between Guatemala and Mexico, and
you said there's smuggling, like, or Russians are going from there to the U.S., Chinese, whatever, other nationals that aren't from South America. Why are they starting there, like near the Darien Gap? Why not start in Mexico?
Because there's two countries that are very close to Russia. You have Venezuela and you have Nicaragua.
Okay.
So they'll fly into Venezuela. They'll fly into areas where they don't need visas.
Okay.
They were also coming into Mexico directly from Cuba. So some were flying Cuba into Mexico. Others were flying into Nicaragua. Some were flying into Venezuela. The issue was that Mexico was beginning to get a lot of pressure from the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And so as they cracked down on the Russian arrivals flying directly in, the Russians and the Chinese and the Venezuelans, all these military-age men just showing up, were coming in through these other areas.
Okay, so how does this affect the U.S.? Who are these Russian people that are coming in? Just they're using immigration as like a weapon, or are these kind of spies?
Okay, so I would say it's a destabilization practice. So it's weaponized.
Okay.
And we know from a U.S. Senate hearing in 2023 that the U.S. Northern Command General stated that in the Mexican embassy, there were more spies in the Russia's Mexican embassy.
Okay.
There were more spies than anywhere else in the world, more Russian spies.
Oh, wow.
We also know that more than a dozen GRU agents were apprehended trying to cross the southern border at different points since the full-scale invasion began. And then the House-led Congress, one of their congressional committees, actually stated that Russia was a threat to the United States coming from the southern border.
Okay, and are there any kind of real-life implications of this now, like consequences of all of this immigration that we can see now today somewhere?
Well, a couple of days ago, the report came from multiple outlets, New York Post, Daily Mail, Daily Caller. I'm bringing these up because these are considered conservative papers.
Yeah.
That 8 Tajik nationals were apprehended in the United States who came across the southern border. 6 of them had Russian identity documents.
Oh, wow.
This was just a few days ago. And I talked about that because even if they were using fraudulent Russian documents, they were able to use these documents, speak Russian, try to get in. They arrived without papers and were, to use the generalized term, paroled into the United States. And it was only when they were in the US that our Department of Homeland Security realized that they potentially had, likely had ties to ISIS. So they were arrested just a few days ago.
Oh, wow.
So that's one example.
Wow. So they have ties to ISIS. So they're like from southern Russia then?
From Tajikistan, but
Tajikistan,
had Russian identity documents.
Okay. Oh, wow. So what can the U.S. do to combat this better? Just close the border?
I would say some of the issues that the GOP was looking at would be a good first start. The Biden administration's executive order that they announced a few days ago, if it's enforced, is also a good start. But what I would personally do from having seen that down there is any men from countries that are considered a threat to the United States should not be paroled into the United States. If they get a visa to come to the U.S., of course, they're welcome. The United States is a free country. But if you have any of these military-age men who are coming as single men, or even if there's a family structure, you have to really look at it and say, why are you trying to cross through the southern border? Why aren't you going to a European country for refuge? Why are you flying across the world to now come into the U.S.? Yeah. And that's what I would do, is that any country that's been potentially looked at as a threat to the U.S. interests these men cannot be paroled into the United States. Let them have their hearings, maybe virtually, or they can be brought in through a appointment system. There was an appointment system that was started by the Biden administration that the Russians ended up cornering the market on and selling the rights to these appointments.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote about that. That's what I found out when I was down there. Hundreds of thousands of hits to the Russian embassy in Mexico to see how to go ahead and emigrate. So we're seeing this constantly. We came across maps from the Chinese showing how to move all the way up and through. That was in one of my reports to the U.S. Congress. So it's documented.
Why isn't this being talked about more? Is this still like conspiracy level kind of stuff, or what's going on here?
I think there are people who would find it easier to chalk it up as conspiracy. I went down there and I happened to run into some guys one gentleman, Michael Yon, and Michael Yon is well known in the Darien region. New York Times has talked about him, et cetera. And I randomly ran into the guy. And they knew who I was because Jan and his team had some ties to, of all people, Alex Jones.
Alex Jones.
And
have you ever met Alex Jones?
I have not, but Alex Jones has attacked me. Yes,
he's attacked you.
He's attacked me. Okay. And so here we are in this very militarized area of the jungle, and I'm running into these guys, and everything that they showed me panned out. I mean, maybe their theories on things are different than my worldview, but the actual physical nature of what's happening is really going on there. And I or recorded in Guatemala, Mexico border. So I walked across a sandbar that allowed me to walk directly from Guatemala to Mexico and back, 100 meters from the official crossing. Then I recorded child laborers pulling across men from Haiti and China from Guatemala into Mexico.
Oh, wow.
There was a fight between me and them. They tried to get my footage, and it was a physical altercation, very, very bad with these coyotes. But there's 3 or 4 of them that were sort of watching over everything and ordering the kids on what to do. Wow. But I got out of there with my footage and I published some of it.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
So it's real. I watched it. I have the footage of it. Yeah. Men are being smuggled by child laborers into Mexico from Guatemala.
Oh, wow. So I know we're talking about all this, you know, there's Russia's involved, all of like the enemies of our country are involved. Does this have anything to do with Ukraine? Like, does it affect Ukraine at all? Any of
yes,
this?
Because so in Russia, they have 3 channels of RT playing in Mexico.
Okay.
So they are on a cable channel, 2 satellite channels. Big station for RT. And it says in Spanish, basically, news without borders, right? Yeah. So they're playing to this idea of the global South. Every time that they're able to win over hearts and minds through their lies and fabrications, it creates more work for Ukraine's partner countries to then battle back in these areas. And we're seeing this in Africa as well and throughout a lot of the global South. And in order to take the focus off Ukraine. Yeah. So if all of a sudden we're playing whack-a-mole all across the globe, it's less money, less time, less media for Ukraine's fight for liberty and liberation.
Okay, speaking of this then, taking, attention away from what's going on in Ukraine, do you feel like Russia had a hand in this Israel-Palestine conflict as well?
I think Russia knew that Hamas was going to do something. And the reason I say that is because Hamas had very good open relationship with Russia's foreign ministry. Okay. Hamas's leaders had visited at least twice in the previous year, meaning the previous 12 months before it happened. So I can't imagine the attack happened without Russia's knowledge, especially due to the fact that the Ayatollah's regime was part and parcel with Hamas's attack on Israel.
Wow. So you think kind of, Russia was involved in this somehow just to take attention? Wow. I didn't realize like they're playing chess up there. I'm just playing checkers down here.
I did an interview in May of 23. Yeah. And the headline stated that Ukrainian soldier says that Ukraine victory will mean Taiwan and Israel can breathe easier. Yeah. So 6 months before the attack, we were already, in a sense, understanding that there was movement in that direction and that we had to find victory ourselves because the world was a powder keg.
Oh, yeah. And then also right before the invasion, China was hosting the Olympics. And there was like some rumors, conspiracy that China knew about this and they told Russia to wait until Olympics are over to invade. Do you think China knew anything about like this Russian invasion?
I don't think China necessarily knew the date it was going to happen, but I think the world knew the date it was going to happen, or at least the sense of when it was. Yeah. There was 190,000 troops on the borders. And another issue that's rarely talked about, even though it's there, is that in classified documents that were from February of 23, the U.S. already knew that China's military had given the go-ahead to China's state-run factories to start providing to Russia.
Oh, wow.
And that cable is out there.
They're
It's
supposed to be
public.
neutral, right? I mean, it's supposed to be.
Well, theoretically, they're talking about peace and territorial integrity, but more and more we see that governments are becoming frustrated with China, and the United States, at least the Department of Defense and some of the House committees have clearly stated that the People's Republic of China is the U.S.'s #1 enemy.
Yeah.
So interests are not aligned here.
Well, of course, and there's probably a million and one reasons why people what people give when they say why Russia invaded Ukraine. What do you think the real reason is?
Putin is a power-hungry madman who is an imperialist and was deranged enough to think that he could create Ruski Mir on lands that don't belong to Russia. It's as simple as that. And Ruski Mir means Russian world.
Yeah, of course. And so he wanted to take all of Ukraine, right? Just one fell
Absolutely.
swoop. Like,
he doesn't want to just take Ukraine. If Ukraine fell, which it will not, but if it had fallen, then he would have had his eyes on the Baltics. He wanted to recreate some sort of monstrosity of what we knew as the Soviet Union.
yeah, but Baltics are part of NATO. You don't think that he would have stopped there because he doesn't want to mess with NATO, or he doesn't care?
We've seen time and again since the first incursions with the Chechen War, Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2013, 2014, as things were happening, of course, the Donbass. He has no red line until he's stopped.
Yeah, it's true.
And nobody's really stopped him until President Zelensky, Colonel General Syrskyi, and the Ukrainian people stepped up and said, no more, we're going to push back.
Okay. And then what is Russia's game plan now then, you think?
Try to wait us out.
So just like a battle of attrition, just see who becomes the next president, see what their politics are, and
Yeah, and hope that their economy can outlast the will of the people of democracy and freedom, meaning Ukraine's partners.
yeah. And I know like Russia has been kind of shuffling around their, I guess, Shoigu got fired, right?
Well, he got laterally promoted.
Laterally promoted.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll put it that way. So what do you make of all this then? Like there's something, obviously something's not going right for Russia, but is this kind of, what kind of change does this indicate?
So I spoke to some folks in the Russian opposition about this, and I asked that question.
Yeah.
And he said that Putin would have never promoted, he knew all the crimes that they were accused of. So if you notice, Shoigu wasn't accused of a crime, but all the people around him, including some generals, were accused of crimes, and some are sitting in jail now. He wouldn't have promoted them unless he knew that they were criminals in order to be able to remove them when needed to consolidate power and consolidate his vision. And so that's what this was. This was an attempt or an actual decision by Putin to consolidate even more power in his vision. And so the new defense minister, who is an economist by trade, is not going to be focused on politics, just focused on the economy, and allow Putin to carry out the war machine and this genocidal, terroristic machine that he helms, according to his depraved vision.
Okay. Yeah. So you said that he's trying to kind of basically wait out the West, but I see numbers. I don't know how, official they are, but it seems like in the last, I don't know, month, 2 months, Russia's losing over 1,000 people like a day.
Manpower isn't an issue for Russia until the folks in the cities.
But it seems like something's ramping up,
because they're sending more people to die.
But if they're trying to do attrition, why just send a bunch of people to die? Why not just like
because they have 144 million people.
Okay.
And we have 37, 38 million now who are actually in country. And what he is attempting to do with these people, and so you have multiple lines. We have a front line that's over 1,200 kilometers long now.
Yeah.
And then behind those Russians are firing squads to execute them if they don't move forward. And the execution squads are normally folks from Chechnya under the command of Kadyrov. And what we see is, okay, let's try to open up a front. If these guys die, no problem, because we're moving at a different part of the front, Yeah. He's still not having to mobilize in St. Petersburg. He's still not having to mobilize in Moscow. And the attrition idea will only become a problem for Russia once the people in those two cities and some of the other metropolitan areas really begin to suffer from the war. And until then, it's just a cleansing of his own country as well. I mean,
that's what I was going to say. It's basically ethnic cleansing of his minority regions.
Minority regions and folks who they don't consider proper members of society. Like, their jail population is down to its lowest, I think, in Putin's time and power.
That's one way to do it, I guess.
Yes.
Well, isn't Ukraine doing the same thing?
Totally different. Anybody who was qualifying in Russia who wanted to sign up. In Ukraine, they get parole under very strict and stringent rules. You have to pass the same medical I passed. You have to pass some of the same testing that I had to pass. And only then, if you complete your full service, are you given full release from your sentence. In Russia, they would take anybody. Somebody who committed double homicide, they're taking you. A child rapist, they're taking you.
Yeah.
That was the rule under Wagner, and it's the rule going forward in Russia. Russia is putting out child rapist on the war zone, and these guys have choice: move forward, get lucky, maybe, or turn around and get shot. And we've seen numerous cases reported in independent media of these folks going back and committing rape and murder in their villages in Russia after they served their year. In Ukraine, it's not a year service contract. It's the same service as every member of the armed forces.
Yeah. I mean, what they're doing, I don't know, how can people turn a blind eye like in Russia? Like, how can you just be like a guy living in St. Petersburg or Moscow and just say, oh, this is fine, as long as it's not me? Is that basically the mindset?
We've seen in Russia's entire history that going ahead and culling their own population is a thing because they don't have a moral compass. Most of the people who support Putin are folks who either don't have the ability to think for themselves or they are lacking a moral compass and a moral and an ethical certitude that we would understand human beings to have.
Okay. And I want to ask, I feel like I'm learning so much from you. I don't know. Whenever I ask a question, it's like, I know I'm an expert on it. I don't know. I love this. So I want to ask about this kind of, this coup, this attempted coup by Prigozhin.
Sure.
Yeah. What can you tell me about this? So he basically just stopped and then he was like, okay, I guess I'll trust Putin with my life and move to Belarus. And then he just died. Like, doesn't make any sense to me.
I think it's something that doesn't make sense to any of us.
Yeah.
I don't believe it started off as an attempt at Putin. It clearly started off as a way to show his dissatisfaction with Shoigu and Gerasimov. And the part that he, I guess, didn't realize is that having been a former felon himself, moving into selling hot dogs, getting into the catering, as we know his backstory, he was still never going to be part of the elite.
Yeah.
He was always Putin's hired help. So even though he had his own fiefdom, he was never on the inner circle. And so when Putin made the statements he did that were tantamount to Prigozhin being a traitor, he was left with two choices: either go all the way or pull back and hope for the best. And we saw what happened. You can never hope for anything good in Russia, even if you're Prigozhin.
Oh, yeah. So why didn't he just go all the way then?
We ask ourselves, I think all of us ask ourselves that.
Did he not have enough troops, or what was
No, he had a pretty loyal following of guys that could have created some upheaval. Again, I think he just lost the will. As many Russians have had happen, Prigozhin's balls shriveled up and went up inside of him. And
I hate when that happens.
And we see that happen with many Russian soldiers. Many Russian soldiers put out this sort of machismo and this boldness, and then they are surrendering to us at the first sign. This is why when we are taking so many POWs in, people are amazed, but it's true. These Russians are literally laying down their rifles. They're waving the white flag. They're calling our hotlines. They want to live. And they understand that all the bravado doesn't matter when, if they come to Ukraine, they will die due to the fact that they're fighting this genocidal war for nothing but a madman who doesn't support them.
Well, yeah, do you go on Reddit?
I do.
Yeah, I go on Reddit. I look at kind of what people are posting. And there's been like a lot of suicide videos where, there's an injured Russian troop, and then instead of like surrendering or waiting for his mates to come get him, he just like kills himself. And somebody in the comments section, they're documenting how many videos are published, and they're saying, wow, this is like a ridiculous amount. Here are all the videos. I don't remember the exact number, but it was, so high. Why do they just commit suicide then? Because
they know they're going to be left behind. And a lot of them, if you notice, the footage comes from our drones.
Yeah.
We're a very humane army. So if we see somebody injured, we are oftentimes going to just allow it to play out and see what happens. They know their own guys are not coming for them. And if they try to search out their own guys and their people see them and they're injured, they're just going to be shot dead anyway. So they go ahead and make the choice of blowing themselves up as sort of this last attempt at a conscious decision, because hope has left them, and abandon all hope for those who decide to come to Ukraine and fight if you're Russian.
It's like they have it's no hope. That's what it is.
No hope.
Like, even if they come back injured, like what kind of life do they have back?
And if they come back injured, they may even be imprisoned due to the fact that it's Russia for not staying out there. Maybe the injury would be judged as too little. We saw an issue when
a clown show over there. Oh my gosh.
It's unfathomable to clear thinking people how their society treats their so-called soldiers. And we know that there's male on male rape within the Russian army. We know that they're barbaric towards each other in the best of times, let alone when things are going bad. In Kharkiv, during the first Kharkiv counteroffensive, which would have been May and June, say June of 2023, I was a journalist at that time, and going towards Stary Saltiv, and there's the video out there, I can't believe I did it. There was a pit where the Russians chose not to take their guys with them, and they just threw them into an open pit, a bunch of Russian bodies, and we ended up having to bury them.
Yeah, because I remember, I reading up on you when you're over there, and you said, like, there's a war on LGBTQ people as well, or values. Can you explain this a bit more?
I think there's a war against anybody who doesn't fit Putin's ideal, and Putin's ideal is some sort of mixture between Stalin and Hitler, mixed with some Catherine the Great. And what we see with the LGBT community, what we see with, there's horrific anti-Semitism in Russia. There's horrific Islamophobia in Russia. We're seeing that right now after the Crocus attack. And ultimately, anybody who is not, in their view, a pure Russian doesn't fit the mold. So if you take somebody who's LGBTQ, especially if they're trans or there's anything non-conforming about them, it creates something that really shakes the state. And the Russian state, which is already, as I said, this sort of fabrication of what we know a nation to be, can't risk anything destabilizing it, because Putin's power is built on the proverbial house of cards.
Wow. Like, what I want to ask you as well, speaking of like LGBTQ, you're in Ukraine. Ukraine isn't the most friendly country. I mean, it's not the worst country, but it's not the most friendly country for LGBTQ plus people. I'll tell you like a quick story. So I have a friend, he's gay, and he was kind of organizing and, involved in these kind of pride rallies when they had them in Kyiv. And he said like, oh yeah, we had the pride rally. And I was like, wow, how'd it go? And he said, oh, it went great. Only 4 people got beat up. And I was like, what do you mean it went great? He's like, it's not that many this year. Usually it's like a lot more. It seems like, Ukraine's making progress, but it's still not the most friendly country. And you being a member of this community, like how do you feel about all this? Being in this country, helping this country when, they're not 100% accepting.
I just gave an interview to a French magazine, and they asked me that question. I've said it before. I'll say it now. I have never personally experienced homophobia or transphobia in Ukraine. Not a propaganda point. It's now 3 years of prides that have taken place since I've been here. And I came over here writing for the largest queer publication in the world, LGBTQ Nation. And I was writing to them, and every article talked about the same thing. There's been such advances in the last 5 to 10 years that we're already, as your friend was saying, it was getting better. But it's ramped up exponentially due to Ukraine's eye on joining the European Union, Ukraine's understanding of human rights as part of this global democracy, global movement of democracy. And I've not personally experienced any homophobia. I was clearly out as a trans person. No problem, not when I was in the trench, not when I was embedded as a journalist, not when I was working for Zolochiv, which is on the Russian border, the territorial district of that area, and not when I came into Kyiv and took up my post with the general staff. Do I get messages online purportedly from Ukrainians? Yes.
Yeah, I know it's part of their kind of I guess it's just the way Ukrainians and like Russians, when they kind of express themselves in like a tough situation, they use a certain swear word. It starts with a P. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you heard this word a lot. Does this offend you at all, or you just understand it's not towards you?
I understand that not only is it not towards me, and if it does get used towards me, words aren't going to bother me anyway. We are fighting to preserve a nation state's ability to exist, along with all the people inside that nation state. I'm not fighting for the liberty and liberation of the LGBT community. I'm fighting to help preserve the liberty and liberation of every single Ukrainian, which includes the LGBT community. And so if these people want to throw around words, but they're willing to have a rifle and fight side by side with me, it's not going to faze me at all.
And you were a journalist here. So how did you make the leap from journalist to kind of joining the fights? Like, which route did you take, and what is the process here?
I'm laughing and I'm smiling about it because if I had the choice to do it again, I don't know if it could have unfolded in any other way but putting me into the military. And the reason I say that is when I arrived in Ukraine, most people were going to Kyiv and some were going to Odessa. We're talking a week after the full scale took place. I went straight from the west to Kharkiv. And from March until October, I never went further than Bakhmut, where I was for 3 days.
Wow.
Other than that, I was in Kharkiv Oblast the entire time, minus 3 days in Bakhmut, 2 days in Sumy. During that time in Kharkiv, something happened where I went from being an observer of the war to being part of a community that was under siege by the Russians. When I lived in Kharkiv, the Russians were 3 kilometers outside the city. They were attacking us every day. Much worse, as bad as it is now, it was much worse then because they were hitting us with mortars. They were hitting us with artillery. They were 3 kilometers outside the city.
Wow.
And one day, it's like the parable of the frog, and you don't realize the water's boiling. And the water's boiling. I jumped out right before it boiled me. But once I jumped out, the only path forward was to join the armed forces of Ukraine.
But how does your family feel about this? I don't know. You're risking your life now. And you're like on the most wanted list, like in Russia. And don't you ever feel like safety for your family as well? Because if they want to hurt you, they can kill you, they can torch you, but also they can hurt your loved ones as well.
It's something that goes through my mind, of course. However, once I stayed past the original 3 weeks, the questions were, why are you still there? And then once the election season came, meaning in June of 22, then they were like, when are you coming back? And then once the general election happened and they knew, wow, you've just joined the military, by that point, they were somewhat accepting, not understanding, but accepting of it. As for safety, while there's definite parameters in place around my family in the United States, and folks are aware of it.
Good to hear.
As for me personally, I'm willing to accept any outcome because I know the outcome in the end is going to be one of victory, liberty, and liberation. And ultimately, the Russians aren't going to be the ones taking me out. I'm going to return to the United States with my body intact, my mind intact, and the understanding that all of the persecution that the Russians were trying to put me through personally and all of the death and destruction that they were bringing upon the Ukrainian people was, in the end of the Russian Federation as we know it, because we will prevail.
Yeah, and how do you feel towards Russian people now, like knowing that they're trying to kill you? Did you have like this strong like change of opinion on them, or did you always hate them? Did you always know they were capable of this?
I knew the Russians. So when I came over here, I knew more about Ukraine than a lot of people, but I was nowhere and in no way a scholar on Ukraine. However, my second book was written in the Baltics, specifically between Estonia and Latvia. I was a digital resident of Estonia. This was 2016, 2017, etc. So I would see the Russians come over to the Baltics and I would go to these museums. I would understand what they were carrying out, what they had carried out, and how they were still acting as recently as 5, 6, 7 years ago to their Baltic neighbors. So I had a strong disdain for the Russian Federation and most of its populace, even before I arrived in Ukraine. Now I look at it, I understand Russia's not a monolith, but at the same point, if somebody wants to be considered a Russian who is able to be part of this global community, then they need to prove themselves as being capable of being that citizen, which means maybe picking up arms here to fight, maybe providing us with information, maybe surrendering, but you have to take solid steps. You can't claim that you are a deserving member of the global community and still support Putin.
Yeah. And Have you ever dealt with POWs before?
You mean Russian POWs?
Yeah, Russian POWs.
I was on hand when we took a couple of POWs in Kupiansk.
Uh-huh.
That was the closest I came to dealing with them. And I saw how they were treated
Uh-huh.
when we took them from the east part of the Oxil River across the western part as we took them off the field.
You ever talk to them, or I know it's kind of
I have not.
touch. Yeah,
I have not.
I don't know. It's because I've seen like the way Russians treats like the POWs. So on a future cast, I'm gonna have Shawn Pinner.
I know of Shawn, and I think he's a real true hero.
Yeah, and yeah, this guy, he wrote a book.
Mm-hmm.
One of my previous guests read the book. He was saying like it's worth a read. And I talked to Shawn. I messaged him. I said, hey, where can I buy it? He showed me where, and I would love to like
buy
read it.
Shawn Pinner's book. He's an OG hero from the United Kingdom. The Russians sentenced him to death, and he's now back in Ukraine supporting victory.
Oh yeah, no, he's still fighting too, and Aiden as well. And they were kind of like malnourished when they came out. It's like they were tortured. And this is not how Ukraine is treating the POWs.
No, we have ability for them to call their families.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, some of the families are so shocked that they're getting calls that they don't believe it's real.
Mm-hmm.
We go so far above what the Geneva Convention asks us to do with Russian prisoners of war that I almost consider them guests as opposed to being prisoners of war.
So Ukraine just holds these prisoners of war until there's a prisoner exchange or until the war's over?
So while I can't speak to the specifics of it,
of course,
anytime Russia is willing to take back their soldiers, our side is more than willing to listen. One of the problems is that Russia doesn't often want to take their people back.
Wow. So what in the Shawn Pinner case, why did they decide to trade them then? Because they were sentenced to death, like in the DNR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's because there was other governments involved, like the UK.
Yeah, I believe that there were some Middle Eastern governments that were involved.
Okay.
I'll let Shawn tell his story.
Yeah.
However, there was pressure. And what was interesting is the Russian Federation specifically took Shawn, Aiden, and one of the Moroccan fighters
Yeah, the Moroccan guy.
to the so-called Donetsk People's Republic.
Yeah.
Because Russia doesn't have a death penalty, the so-called DNR does.
Yeah.
And Shawn and Aiden and the three of them were put on the show trial. And it goes to show that not only did they strip the dignity of them by abusing them, by torturing them, but then they put them on a literal show trial in a non-existing state because all of Donetsk and all of Luhansk belongs to Ukraine. And they went ahead and still sentenced them to death under rules that don't exist and laws that can't exist because, again, the Donbass is Ukraine.
Yeah. And I don't hear much about like this Moroccan guy. I know he was there. Do you know what happened to him? What ended up happening to him?
I don't know what happened with him. I just know that he was able to go free.
He was free. Okay, that's great. That's great news.
He was released as well.
Yeah, and speaking of all of this hate, that Russia has with kind of foreign fighters, tell me about like we talked about it a bit backstage, but I want to know a bit more. Your first experience with you being like on Russian TV is with Maria Zakharova, right?
Yes.
Well, it really affected you.
My very first experience was Zakharova. It was April of 22. So it was just 6 weeks after I arrived. And she put out a statement that I was a gangster. I was everything wrong with journalism and everything wrong with the West. And they put this out on their official embassy channels and such. And
this is when you were a journalist, right?
I was a journalist.
Okay.
I think I had 3,000 followers on Twitter when this happened, when they decided to mark me as their enemy. And then they put out a story that I went ahead with some of our special operations units, grabbed a person, and beheaded him.
Oh, I think I saw that. I heard about this rumor. Yeah.
And so that really shook me. And that sort of led to and we'll call it persona, the persona that I ended up displaying to the world over the next 18 months from when that happened, which was, I was ready to go home when that happened.
Yeah.
And then some of the folks in the security services that I was embedded with said, why are you crying? You're under shelling all day long. We go out to the front. Nothing bothers you, but you're crying over this. Yeah. They said, the Russians attacked me. And they said, this is a badge of honor. They said, whatever you do, you just got to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And obviously, as the world saw, I took it to the next level. And
did this boost your like social media following? Because you have quite a lot.
It was boosted in different ways, but that one I think is what unleashed a lot of the hate against me. So Zakharova was at the forefront of unleashing the hate. Don't worry, Maria, when you're in The Hague, when you're being prosecuted and convicted, I will make sure to send you a letter with a big kiss to you and Solyevov, and of course, my girl Skabeva.
Oh, she's the worst. Was she talking about you as well?
I think she's had me on her show 20, 25 times.
I think it's because you're part of the LGBT community. It's like an easy target. I don't know.
think that, but I'm also willing to say and do things that others necessarily wouldn't while they were in uniform.
Yeah.
And I mean, at one point they put out an all points bulletin that I was in Belgrade. That happened. Another time on Easter Sunday of 23, they put up my picture that I was the reason the devil was in Ukraine was because I'm the devil, so they would take it to these really wild levels.
Yeah.
It started to slow down because now that I've been sanctioned as a terrorist by the Russian Federation and also indicted on these sealed criminal charges, you become persona non grata except in the criminal justice system or maybe from official releases by MFA or something. And ultimately, if the Russian Federation still had an embassy here, I would happily go and talk to them about what charges are pending. But since they don't, I guess you'll just have to catch me if you can.
What was the final straw to whereas they're like, okay, she's a terrorist?
The Latin America trip.
Latin America trip, and that was it.
I'm certain of it. I was speaking with command, even though I was on leave. I was speaking with command every day.
And this was January.
This was January.
Okay.
It was end of December into end of January.
Okay.
And I said, they're not talking about me anymore. I'm down here. I'm
need to do
literally
something.
doing live shows in front of their embassy. Something's up. And we were waiting for it. And as soon as I arrived back in Ukraine, 5 days later, they put me on the terrorism list.
Yeah, because I know that Putin's on like the list for kind of friendly countries for us. And so if he goes to, for example, I don't know, Canada for a conference, then they have to legally arrest him. So if you go to one of these Russia-friendly countries, do they have to arrest you as well?
Yes. We're preparing even to the point that we believe they may put me on their Interpol notice.
Okay.
This is a
Interpol,
possibility. But if I was to go, there's no doubt now. If I was to go to one of their allied countries, without a doubt, I would be arrested and extradited.
Like Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
Right?
I was having a conversation, of course, Cuba, but Nicaragua, Venezuela, Iran, possibly. I was having a conversation with somebody this week over the fact that now I even have to watch where my flight plans go because you don't want to have a flight diverted to one of these countries where it lands, they see you on the passenger manifest. Like it's caused a big issue. It's costing me a lot of money from a legal standpoint. I've had to speak with lawyers who are familiar with international law. And ultimately,
and you got to be careful with airspace too, because I remember there was a journalist. He was on a plane and it was flying over Belarus, and they ordered the plane to land.
That story came up, and he's now under house arrest. And we were discussing all of these potential outcomes. And as I said, it's costing time and money, but no matter what, in the end, we know that there's no validity to it, and in the end, it would have been worth it because if we're upsetting Russia this much through my work on behalf of freedom, then fuck Russia.
Couldn't agree more. It's year 2 of the war.
835, 36 days. Plus, by the time you air it, it's going to be
even more.
Even more.
So is there an end in sight here?
I think we have to look at what an end means. President Zelensky has made clear that we are going to look for a return to the country's 1991 borders, as well as the implementation of his 10-point peace formula. He's going down to the peace summit. There's going to be nearly 50 heads of state down there. And every one of these steps is a step closer to Ukraine returning to the 1991 borders and bringing justice against these war criminals, Putin, Medvedev, and the others, along with Skabeva and Solyevov and, of course, Zakharova. Yes. Due to this fact that we have to look at, the end is in sight because it was supposed to be 3 days and Ukraine would collapse.
Yeah.
We're now approaching 900 days. Little by little, we are preparing for our ultimate victory.
Yeah, and obviously Russia is not going to agree to any of these kind of negotiations. So Ukraine just has to kind of win the war, completely dismantle. So how can Ukraine do this? Like, what is the fastest way Ukraine can do this? They need more aid. They need more people.
We absolutely need as much aid as our partners want to give us in both the areas of carrying out military victory, so kinetic aid, and the aid in rebuilding and reconstructing the type of country that Ukraine deserves to be. And that's a key component in it. As for the speed of the victory, Colonel General Skirsky and his team, along with President Zelensky, his team and Special Operations, General Budanov and others, are working fervently to come up with the quickest way to inflict the most damage on the Russian Federation, and we'll watch the Russian Federation collapse. And as they collapse, we'll see the Russian soldiers running back to their homeland like the rat cowards they are. And whether they get executed by their own people or not on the way, that's their problem.
Doesn't a Russian collapse kind of destabilize that whole area, and there's nukes involved, and maybe it gets balkanized and nukes are there, over there, maybe? Isn't this like a huge problem?
What happened in 1994? Ukraine had nukes and they took them from us.
Yeah, that's true.
So let's worry about that when it comes. The more existential crisis is that there's a madman who, for the first time in history, is using a nuclear reactor as extortion, as a weapon of extortion against the international community. He already has involved nukes. We can't be scared of what could be. We have to look at what is. What is a terroristic genocide action taking place against the Ukrainian people due to Vladimir Putin, who's holding a world hostage through this so-called nuclear power he has. Meanwhile, he's playing games with a nuclear reactor in Zaporizhia every day.
Yeah, and what is something that's, I don't know, you seem like very plugged into all of this. I love talking to you, and I'm trying to get all the secrets I can. So what is something that, an average person like me doesn't know about what's going on, like behind the scenes, like in this war?
We're doing much better than the mainstream media gives us credit for.
Okay.
When I say mainstream media, I'm not trying to use a term from MAGA, but just this idea of there's a groupthink that sometimes comes out. Ukraine is failing, Ukraine's suffering. No, we are holding our own. We are making gains where we can. We are plugging holes where we can. And every step is a step forward. But those headlines are not sexy. Those headlines don't get links or clicks, I should say. Those headlines don't get clicks. And that's the biggest secret that people don't realize. Ukraine under President Zelensky and Colonel General Syrskyi are moving us forward towards victory.
Yeah.
And we saw this with Kharkiv. I was reporting because I was in Vovchansk a couple of days after that, or Vovchansk area. We had stopped their advance. The furthest they advanced was just under 4 miles. And we had already pushed them back. I think they're 600 meters in at this point.
And the reason why they were able to push them back is because the Western weapons came, right, from the U.S., like this Western aid? Or
well, in that particular area, Western weapons have helped tremendously in the Shahs Yar area. They've helped tremendously across the entire border. But it's because of our skill and the leadership of our command that we push them back. We have everyone to thank in the Kortsia region, which is the operational group, along with the main command, for grouping it together. The Russians, for the first time in all of their attacks, sent forward their Spetsnaz as their lead unit. That's one of the reasons they were able to get through. They also were able to jam a lot of the comms. We built back from that. And we've taken almost all of Vovchansk back. We've cleared the road between Lipsy and Kharkiv. We've taken back position. So we've really not only stabilized the front, but we've inflicted tremendous damage on them.
What was their goal in this region? They just want to take Kharkiv, like in a quick push?
Zero chance to take Kharkiv. Absolutely, there would be zero chance to ever take Kharkiv. I believe it was an attempt to take our mind off of the Donbass and a little bit further south by Avdiivka, and just to create chaos. Russia isn't fighting a war. Russia's inflicting terrorism. So all of their movement is just towards furthering their terroristic actions as opposed to winning a war.
Okay, and regarding Crimea, do you think it's possible in this year to take Crimea back? Because I keep hearing like once Ukraine gets Crimea back, that's basically it's like the rest, it's a cakewalk. But Crimea is like the hardest parts.
We're seeing it. We're seeing that our take back is coming soon enough. The bridge is going to, if you're watching in Russia, I said it in December. I'm going to reiterate it now that we're 10 days away from the summer. The Kerch Bridge is going to collapse into the sea before you realize it. And I'm going to be smiling when it happens. The illegally built Kerch Bridge is going to be a reef within the next few months. There's a secret for your show. And when that happens, you're going to see the scattering of the rodents and cockroaches like you've never seen before, rushing back to the Russian mainland, and they will finally realize Crimea is Ukraine.
Yeah, no, it's sick because after the 2014 occupation, Russians just moved into Crimea and they're like, wow, free flat. Cool. Like, yeah, it's mine now. And they just took it. Like, what kind of psychopath do you have to be to not have this empathy?
Last summer, reports came out, and we were talking about legacy media. Legacy media was talking about how the support in Crimea was still so strong. Russian vacation unions were reporting that terrorism was up in Crimea. Tourism was
Tourism,
down dramatically last summer. It's down even more this summer. So the Russian people are understanding that Crimea doesn't belong to them. It's just a question now for the Russian military and government to get that message.
Yeah, and also I heard one of the reasons why Russia really wants Crimea is because there's like these untapped oil reserves like around it. Does this play like a big factor on why they want it so bad?
Well, if you look at some of the areas they took in the Donbass as well, there's a
Yeah.
lot of mineral rights. The Black Sea has a tremendous amount of natural gas. And with this situation, of course, you know, Putin is a gangster.
Yeah.
And what do gangsters want to do? Gangsters want to steal and exploit.
Yeah.
So yes, that would be part of it. But unfortunately, by international law and by the hearts and minds of the Ukrainian people, and especially the Tatar people, Crimean Tatars, Putin doesn't get that stuff.
Yeah, and how, and also like I've seen like a lot of these drone attacks, you know, on Russian infrastructure. How important is this to like ending the war?
It's a war economy, so the more attacks we carry out on their critical infrastructure, the better it is. The idea that we shouldn't inflict certain damage upon the Russian Federation due to oil prices going higher is ridiculous, because you can't put a price on freedom. You can't put a price on liberty, and you most certainly can't put a price on all the eternal heroes of Ukraine who have gone before us and all the people who are waiting to return to their homes.
Okay, sir, I have a question.
Anything.
Anything? Are you sure?
Positive. Absolutely.
The war is over. What are you gonna do?
Corey, I have no idea. I have no idea. You know, I get that question all the time.
It's gonna be this year, Sarah.
I look for every sunrise,
Yeah.
and maybe I might think a week ahead. I have no idea what happens. You know, I'm serving here as a guest of the Ukrainian people. I'm serving here under command of Ukrainian command. If they told me tomorrow, Sarah, get out of here, I leave.
Yeah.
If after the war comes and something changes and all of a sudden I'm staying, great. I have no idea what happens past the next sunrise.
You know, I feel like the news always follows you. Why do you think that is? Why is there always news following you? Like, I don't know. Your life is so interesting.
I think it's because
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
it is what it is. And I think it's due to the fact that I'm willing to give statements that, again, maybe other people aren't willing so much to state aloud. And when you do that, folks are appreciative. I have one rule. I never lie to journalists. And so if somebody comes to me, I'll either tell them, listen, I can't talk about it, or here's what's really happening. I'll give them off-record briefings, but I will never lie to journalists. Why? Because journalists are heroes. And the ones who are here in Ukraine, even more so, the war correspondents around the world. And so I owe them the truth, because they are giving light to these atrocities. And I think that's part of the reason is I appreciate the fact that every bit as much as a soldier is a hero, a journalist in Ukraine is a hero.
Yeah. No, totally. I totally agree. I mean, it's really important to show what's going on in Ukraine, because a lot of people can be ignorant, especially people in the US. I feel like they tend to be like Amerocentric. If it's not happening in their area, then it's not happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I want to ask you another question. Sarah, if there's someone out there and they want to be the next Sarah Ashton Cirillo, and they want to come to Ukraine to help, what advice would you give them?
If somebody wants to come to Ukraine to help, don't do it the way I did it.
What's the way to do it then?
The way to do it is to, if you want to come as a soldier, go ahead and either come over first and meet with different units. You know, more and more folks are joining directly into territorial defense forces, armed forces of Ukraine, et cetera. Of course, the Legion still is open to bringing people in. That's one option. But come over and understand the situation first, and then join. If you want to come over as a volunteer, reach out to 4 or 5 different volunteer organizations, see how your skills match up. The only people who I would say come over and do it like Sarah Ashton did it are the journalists out there, because freelance journalists are so important, especially in the economic situation that journalists are facing today, that freelance journalists who can come over really be able to report on areas of the war and society that others aren't, can truly make their mark in media. And I think that's the people who should just come on over.
Oh yeah, totally. I know that I've always had this thought that I can do more. And of course, like the most you can do is picking up a rifle and like fighting, you know, in this kind of sense, you know, killing a Russian, I guess. But I feel like I'm not the person that is kind of meant to do that. And when it comes to kind of, you know, a lot of these men like in Ukraine that they should fight, but they're not fighting or they're leaving the country. How do you feel about this?
I really look, I'm not happy, and I don't find any space in my heart for those who are running away from the country. You know, the law was the law. You shouldn't run away. However, not everyone is meant to fight. There's some units that if you have 900 people in, you know, or 500 people in a battalion, 900 people in a battalion, something like that, you're only seeing 25% actually fighting at the front. So take advantage of the smart recruiting we have. Jump online, see what jobs are open in the different brigades and battalions that interest you, and try to find a skill and a way to join up and fight. When it comes to mobilization, we have this reserve system, this app. Sign up, create your, put your information in, and don't be afraid. Soon enough, we're going to have enough people mobilized, and everybody's going to be able to contribute in their own way. Not everyone has to pick up a rifle in order to carry out victory, but people shouldn't be running away from the war and leaving it for others to have to pick up the slack.
Okay, and I know like they passed some law or legislation saying that, you know, men that are abroad, they can no longer use the consular services. Do you think this is the right move?
I think that was a memorandum that was put out.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm not sure that's being enforced or ever will be enforced.
Really, you don't think it is?
I do not think it's being enforced. And I don't want to quote you wrong. So if it is, then I think it's a good policy.
Okay.
And I support the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when they put it out. And if it's not being forced or enforced, I should say, then I'm not a voter in this country. So that's also the choice of the ministry.
So when it comes to conscription, I was talking to a previous guest, and the previous guest, I was asking him, how can it be better? You know, so Ukraine has all the people they need because, you know, constantly you always hear like Ukraine doesn't have enough people. Maybe they have enough weapons now, but they don't have enough people. I'm like, what can they do better? And my previous guest said they could probably lower the age of conscription. And he was saying maybe 21, but he's like, ideally, he's like, if I were in charge, 19. Yeah. Do you agree with something like this?
I agree with it in theory. And the reason I say I agree in theory is there's such a demographic issue that Ukraine is facing from when it was in its infancy of being a newly re-independent state in the early 90s, that there was very low birth rate.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of 18 to 22-year-olds out there.
Yeah.
That said, some of the greatest warriors I've met are in that age group.
Yeah.
So I think I would bring it down to 22 or 23 with the exemption for your first college degree. And then the second thing I would do is institute a draft lottery, very similar to what was taking place in the US during Vietnam. Because if you're going to have conscription, it should be as transparent as possible. No better way than to just have the draft lottery. Everybody who's born on a certain date has 10 days to report to, to the record center.
Yeah.
And if your birthday doesn't get called, nobody's going to call you a coward because everybody knows the dates that were called.
Yeah, of course, of course. And yeah, one thing that is kind of, when I talk to people about this, they say, you know what, if these people get conscripted, like they're just sentencing them, and they're just sentencing them to their death because, you know, there's so much corruption in the country and the government is not helping these people once they conscript them. What would you say to this?
Absolutely wrong. We have minimum of 4 weeks of basic training for everyone who's conscripted. That was part of the mobilization law. We're having people graduate from these classes all the time. 4 weeks of basic training is what most of our heroes in World War II from the United States were getting. It changes the mindset. It gives you the skills you need, and it allows you to more seamlessly integrate into your unit. And again, not everybody's being sent to the front. So if anything, I would say being conscripted gives you a chance to truly be part of the fabric of victory.
Yeah.
And no doubt, while I can't talk about numbers, our casualty rate is actually declining year over year simply because our guys are better trained, our commanders are more used to frontline activities, and we know the enemy very well. So for me, and I was in Shahs of Yar recently for 10 days in that area, including in the city itself. I went east of the canal that's very talked about 5 weeks ago with one of our recon units. So I've been back and forth to the front quite a bit, Kharkiv, Vovchansk, Zolochiv, and there's nothing to be afraid of in the sense that we have the best fighters, the best commanders, and the best leadership fighting right now in Europe. And due to this fact, folks need to just get out of their comfort zone, jump into the water, and realize the water's not so bad.
Yeah, I mean, while you were over there, I'm sure you met so many people. Is there someone that you met that just inspires you?
Yeah. I tweeted about it briefly.
Hmm.
It was one of the most amazing stories. I'm smiling because I'm glad you brought this
Yeah.
up. He's with the 56th Brigade, serving in the Shahs Yar area. He was an ambulance driver who was conscripted. He's put into an infantry unit. He goes out to the front. He gets captured. Before they can put his, they put the white bands on him.
Yeah.
An artillery attack comes in from our side. They get like 8 of his guys. He's left in no man's land.
Wow.
He crawls back through the minefield to get to his first unit. They didn't realize he was our guy. He stays with them, starts fighting the Russians. Russians hit them with artillery. He gets concussed, goes to the hospital, comes back out. Dude's 52 years old.
Oh, wow.
He's one of the greatest heroes I've ever met. Amazing guy, real life. I have his picture on my Twitter feed. And by the way, the 56th Brigade, some of our greatest heroes at the front, especially in the Shahs Yar area. And this guy was just, I'm smiling because it's such an amazing story. And you know, they also hit him with a chemical attack because the Russians used chemical attacks on us. It's been reported. He was exposed to chemical attack. He went through it all and literally kept on fighting every time.
What kind of chemicals are we talking about?
I don't want to say, but
Okay.
they were exposed to it, but it didn't stop.
Yeah, I heard
him.
something like this, but I don't know if it was just like rumors.
It's not a
or-
rumor. We have verified verification of Russian use of chemical weapons against the armed forces of Ukraine in frontline positions.
Yeah, what motivates a guy like this to keep fighting?
He doesn't want to live as a slave. He doesn't want to live as a slave. That is the motivation for most people. It's live free or die.
Yeah.
And this is why Ukraine is like America in 1775. It
Yeah.
truly is. The parallels are to our first revolutionaries because they understood what tyranny was under under the monarchy in the United Kingdom. They fought against it. And the same thing would befall them if Putin came back in. The guy's fighting for his family. Most of all, his kid works for the state emergency services. So his kid came of age and joined SES. So the whole family is taking part.
Oh, wow. So do they have kind of, I know there's like this rule, like if you have like 3 kids, then you don't have to fight, or even if you wanted to fight, if you had 3 kids, is that still fine? Or
There's some areas where you can't fight, but if you have 3 kids, you don't have to fight.
Yeah.
If you have a disabled family member who might be a spouse or a parent, you don't have to fight. If you're a single parent with sole custody, you can't sign up, from my understanding. And so there are some rules there. But I think that's fair. If you have to take care of 3 kids and you know that you're living under terrorism anyway every day, you should watch out for the home front if you want. If you want.
You're doing a lot for Ukraine. Do you ever feel like a hero?
No.
No?
No. The guy at the 56th is the hero. The guys who have passed on are the heroes. Your past guest who you just saw, he took massive injuries. I got injured. It took me 11 hours to evacuate. I kept fighting. The story's out there. I've received some medals. All that's there.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm doing it because I'm around Ukrainians every day.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians are the heroes as a society and as the values they hold. And if you're going to talk about military folks being heroes, it's the ones who go above and beyond, like this man from the 56th.
Yeah. I mean, you're very humble about it, but you are a hero, Sarah. So yeah.
I appreciate it. But again, it's one of those things. It's the boiling water.
Yeah.
Once I jumped out, I had no path to go on until victory.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place to end it. Sarah, oh my gosh. Like, yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I was like, I had so much information in my head and I didn't expect this. Like, I basically just tossed out all the topics and I was just like, freestyling it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
No,
Sarah.
This was good. I appreciate it.
It was very good. You kind of like opened my eyes to so much about what's going on in Ukraine. And I really thank you so much for being a guest. And I just want to give you some time. Like, is there anything that, we didn't talk about that you want to kind of share?
Yeah, I want to just make the statement to the American public, because obviously you're looking, your audience is mostly, your guests are mostly foreigners, non-Ukrainians, your audience is as well. And I want to say thank you for putting a focus on all these people who come through here, because the international community, whether you're fighting in Legion, whether you're fighting in SAU, whether you're a non-governmental worker, or you're a journalist such as yourself, everyone who's here is helping bring attention to this genocide. And thank you, I just want to state it, for giving us a tiny bit of spotlight, tiny bit of time to explain why the genocidal actions against Ukraine have to stop.
This means a lot coming from you, Sarah. Like, it really means a lot to me. You're gonna make me tear. Yeah,
Sure.
but I'll tell you what. So now's if you want to plug something, your socials, if you want to plug some organization, yeah, go ahead and do that now to the camera. And yeah.
Sure. Twitter and Instagram. We met on Instagram, Corey and I. Sarah Ashton LV, Sarah Ashton LV. And here's what I want to plug. I want to plug Maria Zakharova, Skabeva, Solyovov, and everyone else. Come get me. I'm right here. And all of your mercenaries and all of your hired folks, come get me, but you never will. And if you come for me, you will die just like you died when I was at the front. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava. Well, yeah, thank you all for watching at home. Yeah, it's been a great episode of Expats in Ukraine, brought to you by The Gays. If you really like this episode, give it a thumbs up, click that subscribe button. If you want to chat with me or Sarah, leave a comment down below. And usually these air on Thursdays at 6 p.m. and I live chat during the premiere, so hope to see you there. So, Sarah, what I like to do at the end of these, I like to stand up, shake hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's been a pleasure. Great, so much. Thank you.